The ledger's numbers had stopped making sense 3 days ago, but Alara Stormborn kept staring at them anyway, her fingers tracing columns of figures that told a story her brother desperately wanted buried. 12,000 gold pieces, vanished from the Windrider Pack's treasury over 18 months, siphoned through falsified supply orders and phantom construction projects. Marcus's signature adorned every single one. She pressed her palm against her stomach, against the slight curve that had only begun to show beneath her loose tunic. 3 months along, and she still hadn't told anyone about the pregnancy. Not Marcus, who would use it against her. Not their father's old allies, who had scattered like autumn leaves after the former Alpha's death. Not the child's father, a traveling merchant who had passed through their territory last winter and treated her with a kindness she'd been starving for. The door to her small record-keeper's chamber crashed open. Marcus filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the lamplight from the hall. At 28, he had their father's golden eyes but none of his wisdom, their mother's sharp cheekbones but none of her mercy. Two of his enforcers flanked him, Garrett and Cole, wolves who had tormented Alara since childhood and now wore their cruelty like badges of honor. "Working late, little sister?" Marcus's voice carried a silken threat that made her wolf flatten against her spine. "How dedicated of you." Alara closed the ledger with careful, deliberate movements. The quarterly accounts needed reconciling. Did they? He stepped into the room and she caught the bitter edge of whiskey on his breath. "And what did your reconciling reveal?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should lie. Every survival instinct screamed at her to lie, to play the meek, unremarkable sister she'd pretended to be for the 3 years since Marcus had claimed their father's position. But her hand drifted to her stomach again, to the life growing there, and something shifted in her chest. "Discrepancies," she said quietly. "Significant ones." Marcus's pleasant expression didn't change, but his eyes went flat and cold. "Garrett, Cole, hold her." They moved before she could react, rough hands clamping around her arms and wrenching them behind her back. Pain lanced through her shoulders, and she bit down on a cry. "You've always been too clever for your own good," Marcus said, stepping closer until she could see the pores on his nose, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Father's little favorite, always scribbling in your books, always watching. I should have dealt with you years ago." "The council will notice if I disappear." His laugh was a short, ugly sound. "Disappear? No, no, you're not going to disappear, Alara. You're going to be banished." He produced a folded document from his coat, official parchment bearing the pack's seal. "For the crime of carrying a rogue's child, for seducing unregistered males, and bringing shame upon the Windrider bloodline." Ice flooded her veins. Did you think I wouldn't notice you sneaking to the healer? That I wouldn't have you watched?" Marcus leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "You handed me the perfect weapon, sister. No one will believe the accusations of a disgraced pregnant exile, and once you're gone, those discrepancies in the ledgers will simply correct themselves. The council won't accept this without evidence." "Oh, but I have evidence." Marcus straightened, adjusting his coat with theatrical precision. "2 witnesses will testify that they saw you slipping into the woods to meet rogues. The healer has been persuaded to confirm your pregnancy is too far along to be from any registered pack male. And as for the records you've been examining..." He plucked the ledger from her desk. "Those will be destroyed, along with any copies you might have foolishly made." Alara's mind raced even as Garrett's grip tightened painfully on her arms. The copies. She had hidden copies in the hollow tree by the eastern boundary marker, but more importantly, she had spent months memorizing every damning entry. Dates, amounts, the specific language Marcus had used to disguise his theft. It lived in her head now, where no fire could reach it. "The Alpha King oversees pack governance," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Banishment requires crown approval. For just a moment, something flickered in Marcus's expression, the faintest shadow of uncertainty. Then it vanished behind a sneer. King Theron Darkhollow has larger concerns than one insignificant pack's internal discipline. By the time any petition reached his court, you'll be long dead in the wildlands. If the cold doesn't take you, the rogues will. He stepped back and nodded to his enforcers. Take her to the boundary. Make sure she understands what happens if she tries to return. They dragged her through the pack house corridors while wolves who had known her since childhood averted their eyes. Down the main stairs, past the great hall where her father's portrait still hung, out into the bitter autumn night where frost already glittered on the dead grass. At the boundary marker, a weathered stone carved with the Windrider sigil, Garrett threw her to the ground. Her knees hit frozen earth, and this time she couldn't contain her cry. Her hands flew to her stomach, protective instinct overriding everything else. Run, rogue lover, Cole spat. And pray we're not the ones hunting you when Marcus changes his mind about letting you live. They left her there, kneeling in the darkness at the edge of the only home she had ever known. Alara stayed motionless until their footsteps faded entirely. Then, slowly, she pressed both palms against her belly and let herself feel the small, flickering presence within. Not alone. She wasn't alone. The Alpha King's palace lay 4 days' travel to the north, through territory that would kill an unprepared wolf and her unborn child without hesitation. But Theron Darkhollow was the only authority who could overturn a pack banishment, the only power Marcus couldn't bribe or threaten into silence. She would reach the palace, she would demand an audience, and she would speak the truth until someone finally listened. Alara pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the ache in her knees and the deeper ache in her chest. Then she turned north and started walking. The wildlands wanted her dead. She felt it in the wind that cut through her thin cloak like sharpened glass, in the frost that crept into her boots within the first hour, in the absolute silence of a forest that had gone still at her approach. Predators watched from the shadows. She caught the gleam of eyes reflecting moonlight, heard the soft crunch of paws on frozen leaves, but none attacked. Perhaps they sensed the wolf in her, diminished though it was. Perhaps they simply weren't hungry enough to risk it. She walked until her legs trembled, then walked further. When dawn broke gray and cold over the mountains, she found a hollow beneath a fallen oak and wedged herself inside, pulling her knees to her chest for warmth. Her wolf, dormant since Marcus's declaration of banishment had severed her from pack bonds, stirred weakly in her chest. Rest, she told it. We have far to go. 3 more days. 3 more nights of bitter cold and growing hunger. Alara rationed the handful of dried meat she'd had in her pocket, saving most of it for the child. She melted snow in her palms for water. She kept moving, always moving, because stopping meant dying. On the 4th morning, she saw the palace. It rose from the valley below like something from the old stories, dark stone towers reaching toward a pale winter sky, banners of crimson and gold snapping in the wind. The Alpha King's seat, the heart of wolf governance for a dozen generations. Even from this distance, Alara could feel the weight of power emanating from those walls, a presence that made her battered wolf whine with instinctive awareness. She was travel-worn, half-starved, and probably looked like the rogue Marcus had accused her of betting. But she was alive. She had made it. The path down to the valley took another 2 hours, and by the time she reached the palace gates, Alara could barely stand. Guards in crimson livery blocked her way. 3 massive wolves who looked at her ragged form with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. "State your business," the largest one demanded. Alara lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "I am Alara Stormborn of the Windrider Pack. I demand an audience with King Theron Darkhollow to report corruption and false banishment. I carry evidence of crimes against pack law, and I will not leave until I speak to the king himself." The guards exchanged glances. The largest one opened his mouth. To deny her, certainly. To send her away to die in the wilderness as Marcus intended. But then a voice spoke from behind them, deep and resonant, and carrying an authority that made every wolf present snap to attention. "Let her through." The guards parted, and Alara looked up into eyes the color of a winter storm, gray and dark and absolutely unreadable. The Alpha King had come to meet her himself. The Alpha King stood before her like something carved from the mountains themselves, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair pulled back from a face that could have been beautiful if it weren't so severe. Power radiated from him in waves that made her weakened wolf press flat against her consciousness, recognizing something far beyond any alpha she had ever encountered. Ilara's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she refused to let them buckle. Not now, not when she had come so far. "You claim false banishment," Theron said, his winter storm eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "That is a serious accusation." "I have evidence." Her voice came out rougher than she intended, scraped raw by days of cold air and disuse. "My brother, Marcus Stormborn, Alpha of the Windrider Pack, has embezzled 12,000 gold pieces from pack funds over 18 months. He banished me to silence my discovery." Something flickered in the king's expression. Interest, perhaps. Or merely the calculation of a ruler weighing the merit of a stranger's claims. "Come inside," he said. "You look half dead." It wasn't sympathy in his voice, not quite, but it wasn't dismissal either, and that was more than she had dared hope for. Ilara took one step forward, then another. The world tilted. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground, and suddenly she was pressed against a broad chest that radiated heat like a furnace. The scent of pine and winter wind and something deeper, muskier, filled her lungs. Warmth flooded through her veins, spreading from every point where his body touched hers, and her wolf, her dormant, diminished wolf, surged forward with a desperate, keening sound that echoed through her entire being. "Mate." The word crashed through her mind like a wave breaking against stone. Her wolf pressed against her skin from the inside, suddenly more present than it had been in days, howling recognition at the male who held her. Above her, Theron went rigid. His sharp inhale cut the frozen air, and when Alara looked up, gold was bleeding into his gray irises, transforming winter storms into molten amber. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, not threatening, but possessive. Primal. A sound that vibrated through her bones and made heat pool low in her belly. "Impossible," he breathed. His hands tightened on her arms, not painfully, but with a desperate quality that matched the chaos exploding in her own chest. She couldn't look away from his eyes, couldn't break the connection that seemed to crackle between them like lightning before a storm. Every nerve in her body was suddenly, achingly alive, aware of him in a way that transcended anything she had ever experienced. This can't be happening. Her mind rejected it even as her body swayed toward him, drawn by an instinct older than thought. The Alpha King. My fated mate is the Alpha King. "Your eyes," one of the guards said, his voice hushed with shock. "My king, your eyes." Theron's head snapped toward the guard, and whatever the man saw in his sovereign's expression made him take 2 rapid steps backward. The other guards followed suit, creating a wide circle of space around Theron and the woman he still held. "Clear the courtyard," Theron ordered, his voice carrying that same resonant authority but rougher now, edges fraying with something barely controlled. "No one approaches until I say otherwise." The guards scattered. Alara barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to the feeling of his hands on her arms, the impossible heat radiating from his body, the gold fire burning in his eyes. Her wolf was pressing forward so hard she could feel fur threatening to push through her skin. "You felt it," Theron said. Not a question. She couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare up at him as her understanding of reality rearranged itself around this single, unthinkable truth. She had come here seeking justice, seeking survival for herself and her child. She had not come here to find this. The mate bond, she finally managed. I felt it. His jaw clenched. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. At the dirt on her face, the tears in her cloak, the evidence of 4 brutal days written across her body. Then his gaze dropped to her stomach, to the slight curve visible even beneath her layers, and something shifted in his expression. The gold in his eyes flickered, then steadied. "You're pregnant," he said. "Yes." She lifted her chin, a spark of defiance cutting through the overwhelming confusion. "With a traveling merchant's child. That's the excuse Marcus used to banish me. He claimed I'd been consorting with rogues. It's a lie, but the pregnancy is real." She waited for his expression to change, for disgust or disappointment, or the cold withdrawal of interest. The mate bond might be fate, but it didn't guarantee acceptance. A king would want an untouched Luna, not a pregnant exile carrying another male's child. But Theron only studied her with those burning golden eyes, his hands still steady on her arms. "You walked 4 days through the wildlands," he said slowly, "pregnant and alone, to bring evidence against your brother to a king who might have refused to see you. I had no other choice. You had many other choices. Easier choices." His voice dropped lower. "You chose the hardest path because it was the right one." Before she could respond, her legs finally gave out completely. Theron caught her again, this time sweeping her up against his chest as if she weighed nothing. The movement pressed her face against his neck, and his scent washed over her again, pine and musk, and that indefinable something that made her wolf keen with longing. "I'm taking you inside," he said. "You need food and rest. The evidence, I need to tell you. We'll wait until you're not about to collapse." His arms tightened around her. "Don't argue with me, Alara Stormborn. You've proven your strength. Now let someone else carry the weight for a moment." She wanted to protest. She had spent 4 days surviving on sheer willpower, and surrender felt like weakness. But his warmth was seeping into her frozen bones, and her wolf had gone quiet for the first time since Marcus's guards had dragged her to the boundary stone, not dormant, content. Alara let her head rest against his shoulder and closed her eyes. She woke in a bed softer than anything she had ever felt, surrounded by warmth and the lingering scent of pine. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The palace gates, the king's gray eyes turning gold, the word mate reverberating through her soul. And she sat up so quickly her head spun. The room was large but not ostentatious, furnished in dark wood and deep red fabrics. A fire crackled in the hearth. Through tall windows she could see stars scattered across a night sky, which meant she had slept for hours. A knock sounded at the door. Alara's hand flew to her throat, to the unmarked skin that suddenly felt vulnerable. "Who's there?" "Theron." A pause. "May I enter?" The question itself startled her. In the Windrider pack, Marcus had never asked permission to enter any room in the pack house. He walked where he pleased, touched what he wanted, reminded everyone daily that their spaces existed only at his sufferance. "Yes," she said. The door opened, and the Alpha King stepped inside. He had changed from his formal court attire into simpler clothes, dark trousers and a gray linen shirt that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. His eyes were gray again, the gold banked, but not entirely gone. He stopped several feet from the bed, keeping a careful distance between them. "You've slept through dinner," he said. "I had food brought." For the first time, Ilara noticed the covered tray on the table by the window. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread reached her, and her stomach cramped with sudden, violent hunger. She hadn't eaten properly in days. "Thank you," The words felt inadequate. Theron gestured toward the tray. Eat. We can talk after. She should have pressed him about the evidence, about what would happen next, about the mate bond that hung between them like a live wire. Instead, she found herself sliding out of the bed and moving toward the food with single-minded focus. The first bite of bread made her eyes sting with tears. Theron watched her eat. She could feel his gaze like a physical weight, tracking each movement of her hands, lingering on her face. But he didn't approach, didn't try to touch her. He simply stood by the window, arms crossed, maintaining the distance he had established. When she had eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger, she looked up at him. You're staying over there. You flinched when I caught you in the courtyard, he said quietly. Before the bond hit. Your first instinct was fear. Heat flooded her cheeks. She hadn't thought he'd noticed, overwhelmed as they'd both been by the mate recognition. I wasn't afraid of you specifically, She stopped, swallowed. My brother's enforcers weren't gentle. A muscle tightened in Theron's jaw. I gathered as much. He moved then, but only to pull something from his pocket. Metal glinted in the firelight. This is the key to your chambers. The door locks from the inside. No one. His eyes met hers with an intensity that stole her breath. No one enters without your permission. Not my servants, not my guards, not me. The key stays with you. He crossed the room with measured steps and stopped directly in front of her chair. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to her eye level, a king kneeling before a banished exile. You sleep safely tonight, Alara. He placed the iron key in her palm, his fingers barely brushing her skin. Even that brief contact sent warmth cascading through her nerve endings. That's a promise. He stood and walked to the door without looking back, without attempting to leverage the bond between them, without pushing for answers about what this mate connection meant for either of them, without taking anything that wasn't freely offered. Wait, Alara said. Theron paused, his hand on the doorframe. Why? She clutched the key so tightly its teeth bit into her palm. The bond. You could claim rights. Any alpha would claim rights. He turned his head and she caught his profile in the firelight. The hard line of his jaw, the shadow of something ancient and patient in his expression. You came to me for justice, not for a mate. Until you've received one, I won't demand the other. A pause. Rest well, Alara Stormborn. The door closed behind him. She heard his footsteps recede down the corridor, and only then did she realize she was shaking. She locked the door with trembling fingers. Then she pressed her back against it and slid down until she was sitting on the cold stone floor, the key clutched against her chest like a talisman. He had given her safety. He had given her food and warmth, and a door that locked from the inside. He had knelt before her like a supplicant rather than a king. Marcus had never given her anything but fear. The next morning brought a summons to a formal breakfast in the Great Hall. Alara dressed in clean clothes that had appeared in her wardrobe overnight. Simple but well-made garments that fit her changing body without binding. Someone had taken care to choose appropriately. The thoughtfulness of it made her throat tight. A servant escorted her through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. High ceilings, ancient tapestries depicting wolf victories, stone archways carved with the names of kings stretching back centuries. The great hall itself was vast, filled with long tables where dozens of nobles were already seated. They fell silent as she entered. Alara felt their stares like physical touches, some curious, some hostile, some speculative. Whispers began almost immediately. She caught fragments as she walked toward the head table where Theron sat. The Stormborn exile. Pregnant, they say? Rogue's whore. The last whisper came from a cluster of noble wolves near the windows, loud enough to ensure she heard. A woman with silver-streaked hair and cold eyes met Alara's gaze with deliberate contempt. Alara's steps faltered. Her wolf, newly awakened by the mate bond, snarled in her chest. But what could she do? She was an exile, a nobody, carrying a child whose father had disappeared with the autumn trade caravans. The insult was cruel, but not inaccurate. Then Theron stood. The hall went utterly silent. Every noble wolf froze, their attention snapping to their king with the instinctive awareness of subordinates in the presence of overwhelming power. Alara Stormborn, Theron said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room, is here as a witness to pack corruption and a petitioner for crown justice. She is under my personal protection until her claims have been fully investigated. He moved around the table, crossing the hall to stand at her side, close enough that she could feel his warmth, close enough that the watching nobles could see exactly where their king had placed himself, between her and anyone who might threaten her. Any insult to her? He continued, his winter storm eyes sweeping across the assembled wolves, is treason against the crown. The woman with silver hair had gone pale. She dropped her gaze to the floor, her scent souring with fear. Theron extended his hand to Alara, not demanding, offering. A choice, like everything else he had given her. She placed her fingers in his, and warmth spread up her arm. He led her to the head table and seated her at his right hand, in the place traditionally reserved for a Luna queen. The nobles watched in stunned silence. Now, Theron said, settling into his own chair and picking up his goblet as if nothing unusual had occurred. Let us eat. The meal passed in a blur of rich food and careful conversation. Nobles approached the head table to pay respects. To Theron, primarily, but many included cautious greetings for Alara. Their deference was probably strategic, but she found she didn't care. The whispers had stopped. The cruel words had dried up in the face of their king's unmistakable warning. Afterward, Theron walked her back toward her chambers. They moved in silence for several minutes, his presence beside her a steady warmth that her wolf kept reaching toward. You didn't have to do that, she said finally. Defend me publicly. It will cause talk. There was already talk. His voice was calm. Now there will be different talk. Talk about why the king is protecting a pregnant exile. Let them talk. He stopped walking, turning to face her. In the corridor's dim light, his eyes held flecks of gold that hadn't been there a moment ago. You came here alone, carrying evidence that could destroy you if your brother catches wind of it, pregnant and half-starved and still standing. You deserve protection, Alara. You deserve far more than that. The mate bond hummed between them, a living thing that pulsed with each beat of her heart. She could feel his emotions at the edge of her awareness, fierce, protective, patient. He was waiting for her to trust him, not demanding it, simply making space for the possibility. Thank you, she whispered. Something softened in his expression. You don't need to thank me for treating you with basic decency. Where I come from, decency is not basic. But she was too tired to resist it. The investigation, she said. When does it begin? Tomorrow. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, feather light. Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we work on destroying your brother. A small, fierce smile curved her lips. I can provide dates, amounts, and exact language from the falsified documents. I memorized everything before Marcus destroyed the records. Of course you did. There was warmth in his voice now, warming underneath the ever-present authority. You magnificent creature. Alara's breath caught. No one had ever called her magnificent. Quiet, yes. Clever, occasionally. Useful when Marcus needed records kept, but never magnificent. Rest well, Theron said, stepping back and letting his hand fall. The loss of his touch left her skin cold. I'll send for you in the morning. He walked away, and Alara watched him go. This impossible man, this unexpected mate. This king who knelt before exiles and defended them with the full weight of his crown. She pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling the flutter of life within. "We might survive this after all," she whispered to her child. "We might actually survive?" Morning came too quickly. Alara woke to pale light filtering through unfamiliar windows, her body still heavy with exhaustion despite the hours of rest. For a long moment she lay still, orienting herself. The soft sheets, the carved ceiling, the iron key still clutched in her fist where she'd fallen asleep holding it. The palace, the king, the mate bond that hummed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. She pressed her free hand to her stomach, feeling for that flutter of movement. There, a tiny shifting, barely perceptible, still alive, still growing, still depending on her to navigate this impossible situation. A knock at the door made her sit up sharply. "Lady Alara?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "The king requests your presence in the council chamber. I've brought breakfast and fresh clothing." Alara rose on unsteady legs and crossed to the door, turning the iron key in the lock. The servant who entered was young, perhaps 17, with auburn hair braided simply and kind brown eyes that held no trace of the contempt Alara had grown accustomed to seeing. "I'm Mira," the girl said, setting down a tray laden with bread, cheese, and sliced fruit. "His Majesty asked me to attend you during your stay." She laid a bundle of clothing on the bed, a deep green dress of fine wool, far nicer than anything Alara had owned even before her banishment. "He said to take your time eating. The investigators won't begin until you're ready." Alara ate slowly, her stomach still adjusting to regular food after 4 days of berries and whatever she could forage. The dress fit well enough, though it hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight in the wildlands, weight she couldn't afford to lose while carrying a child. Mira helped her pin the fabric tighter and braided her hair back from her face with quick, gentle fingers. "You look well," Mira said when she'd finished. "Strong." Alara met the girl's eyes in the mirror. "I don't feel strong." "That's often when we're strongest, my lady. When we don't feel it at all." The council chamber was larger than any room in the Windrider Pack's modest hall, dominated by a massive oak table surrounded by high-backed chairs. Maps covered the walls, territories, trade routes, pack boundaries marked in careful detail. Theron stood at the head of the table, speaking quietly with 2 men she didn't recognize. He looked up the moment she entered, and something in his expression shifted, softened. The mate bond flared with warmth, and Alara felt her wolf press forward eagerly. She pushed it back, focusing on the task ahead. "Alara." Theron moved toward her, and she noticed how the other men watched, noting the way their king's attention centered entirely on this ragged exile. "These are my senior investigators, Lord Brennan and Master Cole." He paused. "A different Cole than the one your brother employed." The distinction mattered. She nodded acknowledgement to both men, who bowed formally in return. "We've received word this morning," Theron continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "A delegation from the Windrider Pack departed 2 days ago. They'll arrive at the palace within the week." Alara's blood went cold. "Marcus. His herald claims he's coming to retrieve a confused and mentally unstable pack member before she can embarrass their bloodline with wild accusations." Theron's lip curled. "He's also filed a formal complaint about her supposed theft of pack records." "I didn't steal anything." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I memorized what I saw. The records themselves. Marcus burned them the night he banished me." "We believe you." Lord Brennan spoke for the first time, his voice calm and measured. "But belief isn't proof. If Marcus arrives with documents of his own, witnesses willing to testify to your instability, he'll have both." Alara forced herself to breathe evenly, though her heart raced. "He spent 3 years building his version of events while I kept quiet. He'll have letters from the healer questioning my mental state. testimony from wolves who watched me stumble through my duties, records showing I was relieved of my position for incompetence. She laughed bitterly. He's thorough. He always has been. Then we must be more thorough. Theron's hand came to rest on her shoulder. Warm, steady, grounding. The touch sent sparks cascading down her arm, and she saw his jaw tighten slightly as he felt it too. Tell us everything, Ilara. Every number, every date, every detail you remember. We have days to build a case before your brother arrives to destroy it. The next 3 hours blurred together. Ilara talked until her voice grew hoarse, reciting the information she'd spent 18 months memorizing. Supply orders that never arrived, construction projects that never began, payments to merchants who didn't exist. 12,000 gold pieces, siphoned away in amounts small enough to avoid notice by anyone not looking for it. The Phantom construction was the largest scheme, she explained, tracing routes on one of the wall maps. Marcus claimed to be reinforcing the eastern fortifications. Monthly payments to a company called Ironhold Construction, 200 gold each time, for 14 months. But Ironhold doesn't exist. The address listed in his contracts leads to an abandoned warehouse in the border territories. Master Cole looked up from his notes. And you verified this yourself? I couldn't travel to check, but I wrote to the border territories record keeper. Her reply confirmed no construction company by that name operated in the region. Ilara's hands trembled slightly. I kept her letter hidden in a hollow tree near our eastern boundary marker, along with copies of the payment receipts I'd managed to make before Marcus restricted my access to the records. Can these be retrieved? Lord Brennan asked. If Marcus hasn't found them, if his wolves aren't watching the area. Ilara met Theron's eyes. I know where they are, but going back to Windrider territory is not something you'll be doing. Theron's voice brooked no argument. I'll send my own scouts. They know how to move unseen. Relief washed through her, followed immediately by shame. She should be stronger. She should be willing to face the danger herself. Instead, she was grateful beyond words that this king, this mate, wouldn't ask her to walk back into the territory where she'd nearly died. The investigators departed to dispatch riders, leaving Ilara and Theron alone in the council chamber. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of palace life beyond the heavy doors. You're exhausted, Theron said quietly. I'm fine. You're not. He moved closer, and she was acutely aware of his height, his breadth, the pine and winter scent of him that made her wolf want to press closer. You've been running on fear and determination for days. Now that you've shared what you know, the exhaustion will catch up. As if his words had unlocked something, Ilara felt her legs begin to shake. She reached for the table's edge to steady herself, but Theron was faster. His arm wrapped around her waist, supporting her weight as easily as if she were made of feathers. Come. His voice was gentle now, the commanding king replaced by something softer. There's a sitting room nearby. You need rest before this afternoon's preparations. She should have argued. Instead, she let him guide her through a side door into a smaller chamber, warmly lit, with a cushioned settee before a low fire. Theron settled her onto the cushions and draped a soft wool blanket across her lap, his movements careful, almost tender. Marcus used to say I was weak. The words slipped out before she could stop them. That I cried too easily. That our father should have let him train me to be harder. Theron went still. Your brother is a fool, and a thief who banished a pregnant woman to die in the wildlands. His opinion of you means nothing. It meant everything for 23 years. Ilara pulled the blanket tighter, not meeting his eyes. He was my alpha, my only family. When he looked at me and saw weakness, I believed him. When he told me I was imagining things, that the numbers added up, that I was embarrassing myself with accusations. Her voice cracked. I almost stopped. I almost believed him. The settee dipped as Theron sat beside her. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth radiating through the space between them. What made you keep going? Alara's hand found her stomach. I found out I was pregnant, and I thought, if Marcus discovered the child, he'd use it. Leverage against me, or against whoever he thought the father was. Another piece to move on his board. She finally looked up, finding Theron's gray eyes steady on her face. I couldn't let my child grow up the way I did. Under his shadow, believing his lies about what they were worth. A muscle jumped in Theron's jaw. His hand moved, hovering near her face, and this time she leaned into the touch before he could hesitate. His palm cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You are the opposite of weak, Alara Stormborn. His voice was rough. You saw corruption where others saw nothing. You gathered evidence at risk to yourself. You walked 4 days through territory that should have killed you, carrying a child and carrying the truth, and you stood at my gates and demanded justice. Gold flickered in his eyes, his wolf rising to the surface. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing I've ever witnessed. The mate bond thrummed between them, pulling, urging. Alara felt herself sway toward him, her wolf practically howling with the need to close the distance. I don't understand this, she whispered. Any of this. The bond, you, why I'm what? Being so kind. Her voice broke on the word. No one is this kind without wanting something. Pain flashed across his features. What do you think I want from you? I don't know. She was crying now, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. That's what frightens me. I can't figure out the strategy. I can't see the trap. Theron's other hand rose to cradle her face, tilting it toward him. The gold in his eyes had spread, warm and bright, and his voice dropped to something almost broken. There is no trap, Alara. There is only a man who has waited 32 years to find his mate, and who will spend the rest of his life proving he deserves her trust. His thumb stroked her tears away. I want nothing from you that you don't wish to give. I will ask nothing of the bond until you're ready. All I want, all I have ever wanted, is for you to feel safe enough to rest. She believed him. That was the strangest part. Despite everything Marcus had taught her about trust, despite years of learning that kindness was a weapon and softness was a trap, she looked into Theron's golden eyes and believed him. Her wolf settled with a sound like a contented sigh. The tight band of fear that had lived around her chest since childhood loosened just slightly. Stay, she said. Just, please, stay. Theron shifted closer, arranging them so she could lean against his chest without pressure, without demand. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, warm and solid, and his chin came to rest atop her head. Sleep, he murmured. I'll be here when you wake. She slept. Hours later, or perhaps only minutes, time had grown strange. Alara woke to raised voices outside the sitting room door. She felt Theron stiffen beneath her, his arm tightening protectively. Doesn't matter what the king says, the Windrider Alpha is his equal in rank. The Alpha King has no equal in rank, my lady, and you would do well to remember. My brother's whore is not fit to— The door burst open. Alara's blood turned to ice in her veins. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 palace guards attempting to restrain her, was a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, beautiful in the cold way of winter storms, the same woman who had called her rogue's whore at dinner the night before. But behind her, wearing traveling clothes dusty from the road and a smile that made Alara's stomach turn to water, stood Marcus. Sister. His voice was silk over steel, concerned and condescending and utterly false. Thank the moon you're safe. We've been so worried. Theron was on his feet in an instant, placing himself between Alara and the door. His voice cracked through the chamber like thunder. Who permitted entry to this man without my consent? I permitted myself, Marcus said smoothly, stepping past the silver-haired woman. When I heard my mentally fragile sister had wandered to your palace with wild tales of theft and conspiracy, I came as quickly as I could. Family must look after family, after all. His eyes found Alara over Theron's shoulder, and the concern in them was perfect, the exact expression of a worried brother confronting a lost loved one. Alara, darling, you've had us all terrified. Come, let me take you home. Her legs wouldn't move. Her voice wouldn't come. She was 17 again, listening to Marcus explain why their father's death was somehow her fault, why her tears were manipulative, why she needed to be stronger, quieter, smaller. Lady Alara goes nowhere. Theron's voice was ice and iron. She is under my protection, and she remains in my palace until her claims have been fully investigated. Her claims? Marcus laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. Your Majesty, with all respect, my sister has been unstable since childhood. Our father's death broke something in her. She sees conspiracies everywhere, accuses everyone around her of plotting against her. I have documentation from our pack's healer, testimony from a dozen wolves who have watched her deteriorate. I also have documentation. Theron's hand moved to rest on the sword at his hip. And my investigators are rather skilled at determining which documents tell the truth. For the first time, something flickered behind Marcus's concerned expression. Calculation. Reassessment. Of course. His smile didn't waver. I welcome any investigation that will clear our pack's name and ensure my sister receives the care she needs. In the meantime, perhaps you'll permit me to stay at the palace? Families should be together during difficult times. Alara found her voice at last. He's lying. It came out stronger than she expected, fueled by something fierce and desperate. Everything he says is lies. He stole 12,000 gold pieces from our pack over 18 months. He burned the evidence and banished me to die before I could tell anyone. Shh, darling. Marcus's voice dripped with pity. You see? This is what I mean. Wild accusations, impossible to verify, aimed at everyone who tries to help her. I have verification. Alara stepped out from behind Theron, ignoring the way her legs shook. Letters from the border territory confirming your fake construction company doesn't exist. Copies of payment receipts with your signature. Testimony from witnesses who saw shipments that never arrived. Marcus's mask slipped for half a second, just long enough for Alara to see the cold fury beneath. You're lying, he said softly. You have nothing. I have everything. She raised her chin, meeting his eyes. I learned from you, brother. I learned to plan ahead, to prepare for betrayal. Her hand pressed against her stomach, against the flutter of life within. And I learned that family isn't blood. Family is the people who don't try to murder you in the wildlands. Silence. Then Marcus lunged. Theron moved faster than Alara's eyes could track. One moment Marcus was lunging toward her, his hands outstretched like claws, his face twisted with murderous rage. The next, Theron had intercepted him mid-stride, slamming her brother against the wall with enough force to crack the stone behind him. The sound echoed through the sitting room like thunder, and Marcus's breath left him in a pained wheeze. Guards! Theron's roar shook the windows. The two wolves who had been struggling with the silver-haired woman snapped to attention, their earlier confusion replaced by deadly focus. Seize him, now! They moved instantly, wrenching Marcus's arms behind his back, while Theron held him pinned. The silver-haired woman shrieked something about diplomatic immunity, about pack sovereignty, but another guard appeared in the doorway and silenced her with a firm hand on her shoulder. Alara couldn't move. Her legs had turned to water, her heart hammering so violently she could feel it in her throat. Marcus had tried to kill her. In front of the Alpha King, in front of witnesses, he had tried to murder her with his bare hands. All pretense of the concerned brother had shattered in that single, desperate lunge. "You've made a terrible mistake," Marcus snarled, struggling against the guard's grip. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead where he'd struck the wall. "I am the alpha of the Windrider pack. You cannot hold me without cause." "Cannot I?" Theron stepped back, and Alara watched his hands clench at his sides, fighting for control. Gold blazed in his eyes, his wolf straining against the leash of his discipline. "You just attempted to attack a woman under my personal protection, a witness to crimes against pack law, in my own palace." His voice dropped to something low and deadly. "That alone is cause enough to remove your head from your shoulders." Marcus's face went pale, but he rallied quickly. "She provoked me. She's been spreading lies, trying to turn you against your own subjects. Ask anyone. She's mentally unstable. She's enough." The word cut through the room like a blade. Theron turned to face Alara, and some of the fury in his expression softened when he saw her trembling. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her voice wouldn't come. Her hand pressed against her stomach, feeling for the flutter of movement that would tell her the baby was safe. There. A tiny stirring. Faint, but present. She exhaled shakily. "She carries evidence," the silver-haired woman said, her voice brittle with barely concealed panic. "Whatever she's told you, it's fabricated. Marcus can prove—" "Lady Varana." Theron didn't even look at her. "You will be silent, or you will be removed. Those are your only options." The woman, Varana, snapped her mouth shut, her face mottling with humiliated fury. Theron's attention returned to Marcus, who had stopped struggling against the guards but whose eyes burned with hatred. "You will face formal trial for your crimes, attempted murder of a royal witness, corruption of pack funds, conspiracy to pervert the course of crown justice." He paused, and something cold and satisfied flickered across his features. "The evidence against you is already substantial. Your actions today have merely confirmed what my investigators suspected." "What evidence?" Marcus demanded. "Her memorized fantasies? You can't convict an alpha on the word of a pregnant exile who—" "I can." Alara's voice emerged stronger than she expected, fueled by something that felt like fire kindling in her chest. "Because I'm not the only one who kept records." Every eye in the room turned to her. She stepped forward, ignoring the way her legs still shook, ignoring the instinct that screamed at her to stay behind Theron where it was safe. Her wolf pressed against her skin, lending her strength, and she felt the mate bond pulse with warmth, Theron's pride flowing through it like sunlight. "You burn the ledgers in my office," she said, meeting Marcus's eyes. "But you didn't know about the correspondence I kept. Letters from the border territory record keeper, confirming that Ironhold Construction doesn't exist. Has never existed. The company you claimed was building eastern fortifications? A phantom. A shell for siphoning gold into your private accounts." Marcus's face went gray. "You're lying." 14 months of payments," Alara continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. 200 gold pieces each month, signed off by you personally. I have the dates. I have the amounts. I have your exact language on the authorization forms." She drew a breath, feeling the words rise from that place in her mind where she'd locked them away. The fortress of memory that no fire could touch. 13th of Frost Moon, 200 gold. 5th of Long Night, 200 gold. 22nd of... "Stop." Marcus's voice cracked. "Stop it." But she didn't stop. She recited every transaction, every date, every falsified entry, her voice filling the room with the irrefutable truth of his theft. The guards listened in grim silence. Varana's face went from flushed to pale to something approaching green. And Marcus. Marcus shrank with every word, his defiance crumbling as he realized she had handed the Alpha King a weapon he couldn't refute. When she finished, silence hung in the air like the aftermath of a thunderclap. Theron spoke first, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Take him to the cells. Lady Verana as well. She will answer for her role in this conspiracy. You can't do this, Marcus whispered, but there was no conviction left in it. I'm an alpha. I have rights. You have the right to trial. Theron's eyes were winter cold. Which is more than you gave your sister when you banished her to die in the wildlands. The guards dragged Marcus toward the door. He fought them, weakly, desperately, his eyes finding Alara one last time. This isn't over. You think you've won something? You've won nothing. You're still a disgraced exile, still carrying a bastard child, still. She is my mate. Theron's voice cut through Marcus's vitriol like a sword through silk. And when she claims her rightful place at my side, she will be Luna Queen of every pack under my dominion, including yours. Marcus's face contorted with shock, then fury, then something that might have been fear. Then the guards hauled him through the doorway, and he was gone. The trial convened 3 days later in the Great Hall of the palace, with alpha representatives from 6 neighboring packs serving as witnesses. Ilara stood before them all, no longer travel-worn, no longer trembling, though her heart still raced when Marcus was brought before the assembled wolves in chains. He looked diminished somehow. The swagger that had defined him for 3 years had evaporated, leaving behind a man who seemed smaller than she remembered. Older. Afraid. Good, her wolf growled. Let him know what it feels like. The evidence was presented methodically. Theron's investigators had worked through the nights, corroborating everything Alara had memorized with physical documents recovered from Marcus's private quarters, documents he'd been too arrogant to destroy properly. The letters from the border territory, the authorization forms bearing his signature, the account ledgers from the merchant bank where he'd deposited the stolen gold. Marcus tried to speak in his own defense, tried to claim the records were falsified, that Alara had conspired with unknown enemies to frame him, that his sister's mental instability was well documented. But his witnesses had fled the moment they'd heard of his arrest, and the healer who had supposedly confirmed her pregnancy timeline sent a sworn statement recanting everything. She had been threatened, she said, coerced. She begged the court's forgiveness. When the last piece of evidence had been presented, Theron rose from his throne. Marcus Stormborn, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You stand convicted of theft from your own pack, falsification of official documents, conspiracy to commit murder by banishing a pregnant woman to die in the wildlands, attempted murder of a royal witness within the walls of this palace. Marcus lifted his chin, some ghost of his old defiance surfacing. I am an alpha by right of blood. You cannot execute me without... I can. Theron descended the steps from his throne, stopping before Marcus's kneeling form. And I will. His voice softened, but somehow that made it more terrible. You would have murdered your pregnant sister to hide stolen gold. You would have let her freeze to death, let rogues tear her apart, let your own blood perish so you could keep your ill-gotten fortune. He shook his head slowly. Alara Stormborn showed more strength pregnant and alone than you have shown in your entire life. She walked through territory that should have killed her. She stood at my gates and demanded justice. She faced you today and spoke the truth without flinching. His hand moved to the sword at his hip. You do not deserve to share her blood. Marcus's mask cracked completely then. Fear, real, desperate fear, flooded his features. Please, I'll return the gold. I'll abdicate. I'll go into exile. I'll never... The sentence is death. Theron's voice held no mercy. To be carried out at dawn. They dragged Marcus away screaming, his pleas echoing off the stone walls until the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. Alara watched him go. She waited to feel something, satisfaction perhaps, or grief for the brother he might have been. Instead, she felt only the absence of weight. The fear that had lived in her bones for 3 years, the constant vigilance that had become as natural as breathing. It was lifting, slowly, like morning fog burning away in sunlight. At dawn the next morning, the blade fell. Alara did not attend the execution. She sat in her chambers with Mira, the young servant who had become something like a friend, and listened to the distant toll of the palace bells announcing that justice had been served. "It's over," Mira said softly. "He can't hurt you anymore." Alara pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the flutter of life within. "No," she agreed. "He can't." That evening, Theron came to her. He knocked first. Always. He knocked first, and waited for her soft enter before opening the door. The setting sun painted her chambers in shades of amber and rose, and Alara turned from the window to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "Strange." She moved toward him without conscious thought, drawn by the pull of the bond that thrummed between them like a living thing. "I keep expecting to feel guilty. Sad? Something. But I just feel—" She trailed off, searching for the word. "Free?" he offered. "Yes." She stopped before him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Free." Theron's hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Gold flickered in his gray eyes, his wolf pressing close to the surface. "Ilara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever your answer is, nothing changes. You remain under my protection. You remain safe here, for as long as you wish." Her heart stuttered. "What is it?" "The bond." His voice roughened. "I feel it constantly now. The pull toward you, the need to be near you, to know you're safe. My wolf is restless. Has been since the moment you walked through my gates." He drew a breath. "I want to claim you, mark you as mine and be marked as yours. But only if you want it. Only if you're ready." Alara searched his face, looking for the trap she'd been trained to expect. The hidden agenda. The leverage play. She found nothing but open vulnerability, a powerful man laying his heart at her feet and waiting to see if she would accept or shatter it. Her wolf surged forward with a sound like joy. "Yes," she whispered. Something broke open in Theron's expression, relief and wonder and fierce, desperate love. He pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist and pressed his forehead to hers. "Are you certain? There's no rush, no pressure." "I'm certain." She tilted her head, pressing her lips to the corner of his mouth. "I've spent my whole life being afraid, being careful, waiting for safety that never came." She drew back just enough to meet his eyes. "You make me feel safe. You make me feel like I could be strong without needing armor, and I don't want to wait anymore." Theron made a low sound in his throat, something between a groan and a growl, and lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. He carried her to his chambers, to the massive bed draped in crimson and gold, and laid her down with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. Then he stretched out beside her, propping himself on one elbow, and traced the curve of her face with reverent fingers. "I want you to mark me first," he said quietly. Alara blinked. "What?" "You've spent your life being claimed by others, controlled, used." His thumb brushed her lower lip. "I want you to claim me. I want you to know that I am yours before I am anything else." He tilted his head back, baring the strong column of his throat, the most vulnerable place on any wolf's body, an alpha's submission, an offering. Alara's wolf howled with fierce, possessive joy. She rose up, pressing him back against the pillows, and felt the power of his body coiled beneath her, all that strength, held in check, waiting for her permission. Her mouth found the junction of his neck and shoulder, and she breathed in his scent, pine and winter wind, and the deeper musk that was purely him. Mine, she whispered against his skin. Then she bit down. Theron's whole body shuddered beneath her. His hands flew to her hips, gripping hard enough to bruise, and a sound tore from his throat that was half growl and half moan. Alara felt the bond roar open between them, a flood of sensation that left her gasping. His emotions poured through her. Fierce protectiveness, aching tenderness, desperate need. Love. Love so vast it felt like drowning. And beneath it all, a single word pulsing like a heartbeat. Mine, mine, mine. She released him slowly, licking the wound she'd made, tasting copper and salt on her tongue. The mark would scar, would stay forever, proclaiming to all wolves that Theron Darkhollow belonged to her. Ilara. His voice was wrecked. Please, let me. Yes. He moved then, rolling her beneath him with a grace that stole her breath. His weight settled over her, not crushing, just present, sheltering, and his mouth found her throat. He paused there, lips brushing the sensitive skin, and she felt his canines lengthen against her pulse. This may hurt, he murmured, only for a moment. I know. She arched into him, offering herself. Do it. His teeth pierced deep. Pain lanced through her, sharp, bright, immediate. And then something extraordinary happened. The pain transformed, cascading into warmth that flooded through her veins like liquid sunlight. The bond that had been humming between them exploded into full, glorious completion, and suddenly she could feel everything. His heartbeat synced with hers, his breath filling her lungs, his love wrapping around her soul like armor. Mine, he whispered through the bond, not words, but pure emotion, more real than sound. Yours, she answered, and felt him shudder against her. He released her throat slowly, licking the wound closed, then lifted his head to meet her eyes. Gold blazed in his irises, his wolf fully present, and she knew her own eyes must look the same. Mate, he breathed. Mate, she echoed, and pulled him down into a kiss that sealed the word like a vow. They lay tangled together as the stars emerged outside the window, her head on his chest, his hand spread protectively over her belly. The bond hummed between them, settled now, peaceful, a connection that nothing could sever. I meant what I said, Theron murmured against her hair. About you being Luna Queen. Alara stirred, tilting her face up to look at him. That wasn't just something you said to hurt Marcus? No. His hand moved to trace the mark on her shoulder, and she shivered at the intimate touch. You are my mate, my Luna. When the coronation takes place, you will stand beside me as queen of every pack under my rule. His eyes softened. If you want it. She thought about the girl who had knelt in frozen darkness 4 days ago, exiled and alone, and pregnant with a child she couldn't protect. She thought about the woman who had stood before 6 Alpha representatives and recited the evidence of her brother's crimes without flinching. She thought about the future, not with fear, but with hope. I want it, she said. The coronation took place a fortnight later in the same great hall where Marcus had been condemned. Representatives from every pack in the realm gathered to witness, and Alara walked through their midst with her head held high, wearing crimson silk that matched the banners of her mate's house. Theron waited for her at the base of the throne, his hand extended, his eyes burning gold. When she reached him, he lifted her fingers to his lips and kissed them. Ready? He murmured. Yes. Together they climbed to the throne. Theron turned to face the assembled wolves, one arm around Alara's waist, and his voice rang through the hall. I present to you Alara Darkhollow, Luna Queen of the Realm, my mate, my equal, my heart. The hall erupted in howls of acknowledgement, voices rising in waves that crashed against the vaulted ceiling and echoed back down. Alara felt tears prick her eyes as wolves she didn't know bent their heads in respect, as power she'd never imagined flowed through the bond from Theron's touch. At the edge of the crowd, she spotted familiar faces, the surviving elders of the Windrider pack, wolves who had served her father and scattered after his death. They knelt now, tears tracking down weathered cheeks, and she felt something heal inside her chest. That night, curled against Theron's chest in their shared chambers, Alara felt the baby stir beneath her palm. Theron's hand joined hers, his warmth seeping into her skin, and she heard his breath catch. "I felt that," he whispered. "Your heir," she murmured, smiling against his shoulder. "Crown Prince, or Princess of the Realm." "Our child." His voice was rough with emotion. "Ours." The constant fear she had carried since childhood, the vigilance, the waiting for the next blow to fall, had finally unknotted from her bones. In its place, she found something she had never truly believed in: peace. "Rest now," Theron murmured, his lips brushing her temple. "You're home." She was.